Hello there, you're watching World 360 on CNN News 18. I'm Maha Siddiqui. Over the next half an hour, we'll take you through all the major international stories of the week. Our pivot this week, there's been a sharp escalation in violence in Afghanistan as the US forces prepare to leave in September. US says it will continue its support to the Afghan forces and its diplomatic backing, but the instability it's leaving behind is worrying the countries in the region. What's at stake for India, which is now trying to talk to the Taliban as well? That's our focus this evening. But before the deep dive, here are the headlines. President Joe Biden promises sustained US support to Afghanistan as he meets President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah. India expresses concern over the escalating violence in Afghanistan in UN Security Council. Pakistan stays in the Financial Action Task Force grey list. The terror funding watchdog tells Pakistan to investigate and prosecute UN-proscribed terrorists, sets new targets to check money laundering. And China's clampdown in Hong Kong continues. Popular pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily discontinues printing after the arrest of 5 editors and executives. One by one, the Taliban has been taking over areas in a number of provinces in the northern Afghanistan region in recent weeks. 50 of Afghanistan's 374 districts have fallen to the Taliban since May. Some were seized without a single shot being fired. The dire warnings come just 2 months after President Joe Biden announced that US and NATO troops would withdraw from Afghanistan by September 11. Aside from the security issues, the Taliban's current offensive has also exposed ongoing peace negotiations with the Afghan government as a sham. Here's CNN's Nick Robertson's report.
In a recently overrun army base in northern Afghanistan, Taliban show off captured heavy weapons and ammunition. CNN cannot verify the authenticity of the videos or the date they were filmed, and Afghan security officials could not confirm or deny Taliban claims in these videos to CNN. But they do admit to losing dozens of towns in the past fortnight. The Taliban claim 90 such victories in the past month. The UN says it's less. 50 of 370 gone, but still very concerning.
Most districts that have been taken surround provincial capitals, suggesting that the Taliban are positioning themselves to try and take these capitals once foreign forces are fully withdrawn.
At times, the Taliban claiming wins without firing a shot. In Tahrir province, a whole column of up-armoured American-made Afghan army Humvees are surrendered by government soldiers to the Taliban. The soldiers dump their guns in a pile, a valuable boost for the Taliban, who are fighting hundreds of miles from their heartland in the south and east. Afghan government officials say they are sending reinforcements to take back control and claim without proof to have killed hundreds of Taliban. The Taliban offensive appears to take advantage of the US and NATO drawdown, limiting air support for Afghan troops on the ground, and raises questions about their intent at peace talks in Doha with the Afghan government. It's also significant that they're attacking the north. I covered the Afghan conflict in the 90s when the Taliban were fighting their way up the country. It took them years to get up to the north. This will send a very chilling message to Afghans. The Taliban surge, also a concern for US forces, who agreed their own ceasefire with the Taliban as they exit their longest war, but hoped they might leave the country at peace.
Every day, the situation in Afghanistan changes as the Taliban continue to conduct these attacks and to raid district centers, as well as the violence, which is still too high.
Nick Robertson, CNN.
Amidst the fast-developing situation in Afghanistan, US President Joe Biden met with President Ashraf Ghani and Dr. Abdullah at the White House. Biden said that the American troops may be leaving, but its support for Afghanistan is not ending. Meanwhile, Ghani thanked the US for its support during the war and called Biden's withdrawal decision historic. After peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban proceeded in fits and starts, the negotiations are currently stalled. CNN's Phil Mattingly joins us from the White House now. Phil, what was the expectation with which the Afghan leaders came to Washington, D.C., and what have they been told?
Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani had several messages that he wanted to deliver to President Biden. Obviously, there was no question that the troop pullout that President Biden had already announced was not going to change, no matter what President Ghani put on the table. But there is clear need, clear necessity for more U.S. assistance as the U.S. moves through that process. The country security situation very clearly deteriorating amidst Taliban offensives throughout the country, particularly in the north. Real concerns from U.S. intelligence officials that the country could fall within 6 months of the U.S. officially departing after September 11th. Where things stand right now, the U.S. is not changing, and President Biden is not moving off of that September deadline. He's making clear the U.S. will continue humanitarian support, will continue its presence at an embassy in Kabul, and there will be about 650 U.S. troops there to protect that embassy. But that security situation, that is up to the Afghans. Whether or not a peace agreement gets signed, the U.S. supports it, but that is also up to the Afghans. And of course, there's also the big question of those Afghanis who helped U.S. forces, U.S. personnel over the course of the last 19 years. The administration still working through that process as well. As of now, they've identified a certain group of those individuals that are going through the special immigrant visa process. They will be evacuated before the September deadline to a third country as they move through that process. How many that will be and what that third country is, that is still up in the air, but obviously a very complex situation, and a Biden administration making very clear, despite the visit in person from the Afghan president, they're not changing their posture on this. All they can offer is help and assistance, not of the military variety.
Phil Mattingly, many thanks for joining us with all those details from the US. Let's now go across to India's former ambassador to Afghanistan, Amar Sinha, who's joining us on what's at stake for India. Many thanks, Ambassador Sinha, for speaking with CNN News 18. What is your assessment, sir, of the situation in Afghanistan, as over 50 districts, as CNN is reporting, have fallen to Taliban already, but sources continue to stress that Afghan government is very much in control and will continue to be so?
Of course, first, I think this entire thing of Taliban winning on the battlefield is a bit overblown. It's part of the psyops, propaganda.
Okay.
No doubt that the situation is difficult. The Afghan security forces are under pressure. But just remember that these are outlying districts. I have been to some of them, and I can tell you these district headquarters really, we tend to imagine what it is in India, but these are basically small towns with 2 buildings.
Okay.
One, the local governor and the police, and maybe 5 or 6 shops, and 200 people. So now to protect all this, I think they have taken a strategy in terms of defense where they are focusing more on the major cities, major assets, rather than protecting every outlying area.
But despite that, Ambassador Sinha, in that context, how important is it that India is trying to talk to Taliban? How crucial and important is it for India to make some headway there?
Well, I think it's not really crucial for India. I think it is very crucial for the peace in Afghanistan and for the process to move forward. India is perhaps one of the last major countries to have engaged Taliban, and rightly so. And this was a progression of our policy, which basically focused on supporting the Afghan government and the institutions and the gains that they have had over the last 20 years to preserve those. Reaching out to them to tell them what our expectation is. And as a regional country, as an important member of SAARC, I think our view needs to be well known to Taliban. Taliban would also perhaps have requests from India in terms of continuing its development partnership. In its current role as heading the committees in UN Security Council, which deal with delisting of terror organizations and individuals, I think Taliban has certain demands, so I'm sure that would have been discussed. So we should not see that it's about turn in India's policy. I think once the Taliban engaged with the Afghan government, I think it was absolutely logical for us also to engage with them and to talk to them. And since we also follow a no exit policy, it is important that we engage with all sides and all political actors.
But Ambassador Sinha, we know that the Taliban supports over 20 terror organizations, some of them directly targeting India and India's assets as well. In that sense, how important will this entire situation be from the perspective of security and stability in the region?
Yes, of course. Let me slightly modify your statement that you said that Taliban supports. No, let's not forget that it's not Taliban that supports. Taliban is networked with these organizations because they all exist in the same ecosystem. But the support for all of them comes from a totally different source, which unfortunately is an official source. And that is the patron of all these terror organizations. Our worry really is, it's not that the Afghans have enmity towards India or even Taliban has enmity towards India and you will see thousands of Taliban coming into India to wage a jihad. No, far from it. It is actually the encouragement and fillip that the terror organizations and the radical groups get from this sort of a perceived victory of Taliban, which would pose a challenge not only to us, but to all the other regional countries and neighbors of Afghanistan.
Ambassador Sinha, now the Afghan ambassador to India has told CNN News 18 that India should send out a clear message to Taliban to shun violence and preserve the gains of the last 20 years, particularly the democratic gains. Do you think India has that kind of leverage to send that message out on behalf of the Afghanistan government?
I think yes, India is an influential voice in the global arena. And I am sure there are many moderates in Taliban and many leaders in Taliban who also desire peace after 20 years. You know, they have been out of their own country, waging what they called a jihad, for which the basic reason, that's the presence of foreign troops, is ending. So they will also, if they have to continue with this sort of a fratricidal violence, they will have to look for new narratives and a new justification for jihad. They would also want Afghanistan to be a normal country. Ultimately, they have families, they have children who are very well connected. This is not the world for Afghanistan of 1996. We are looking at a different era. And I think India's messaging is very clear. And I'm sure whoever met at whatever level the Taliban, a similar message would have gone. But I think it has been articulated by our foreign minister and our foreign secretary, both in terms of our major concerns, which is continuing violence and lack of ceasefire, and what is it that is worth preserving. And I think foreign minister speaking at the UN Security Council made it absolutely clear that some of the basic or the fundamental gains that Afghanistan has had in education, in women's rights, in minorities' rights, in freedom of expression, in the ability to choose their own leadership, are gains that are worthy of being preserved and supported by not only India, but all democratic governments and all who value these achievements.
Absolutely. Many thanks, Ambassador Sinha, for joining us with your perspective there. Now, staying on with the region, Pakistan remains on the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force after failing to comply with all of the 27 points in the Global Terror Watchdog's Action Plan. One of the key issues that remains unmet is investigation and prosecution of UN-proscribed terrorists like Hafiz Saeed and Masood Azhar. FATF has said that the country failed to check the risk of money laundering leading to corruption and terror financing. With Pakistan's continuation in the grey list, it will become increasingly difficult for the country to get global financial aid, and that's why it was desperate to exit the grey list. Sanjay Suri is now joining us live from London for more details on what the Paris-based FATF's decision was and what it means going ahead. Sanjay, what has been the reaction specifically from Pakistan, considering it had been pushing desperately to exit from the grey list?
Well, Pakistan has been crying foul, predictably. The Foreign Minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, has said that the FATF is engaged in a more political than technical exercise. But of course, the technicalities that the FATF is engaging with have been used to political ends within Pakistan. Qureshi has said also that Pakistan has met 26 of the 27 requirements. But we know that this is not about giving marks in an exam where every mark carries equal weight. The critical issue, as you pointed out, is going after the masterminds of terror financing. And it is conceivable and very well arguable that had Pakistan done just that, the rest might have fallen into place.
Sanjay Suri, many thanks for joining us with all those details with regards to the FATF. Now, several persons are still missing after a building collapse in Miami in America, and the 90s pop star Britney Spears tells court that she wants to live her life without restrictions that she's been under. That and more in World in a Minute.
At least one person has died and dozens are missing after a 12-story residential building collapsed north of Miami, Florida. The number of people who have been located now stands at 102, while 99 are still missing. Rudy Giuliani, who was the personal lawyer of former US President Donald Trump, has been suspended from practicing law in the New York state. An appellate court found that he had made demonstrably false and misleading statements about the 2020 election. Britain is prepared to sail naval vessels through disputed waters near Crimea days after a confrontation between a British warship and Russian forces in the Black Sea. Russian warplanes dropped bombs and a patrol boat fired warning shots at a British destroyer it claims entered into its territorial waters. US pop star Britney Spears launched a blistering attack on the abusive conservatorship that has controlled her life for 13 years. She said she was traumatized and cried every day, adding that she just wanted her life back. John David McAfee, the founder of the antivirus software maker bearing his name, died by suicide in a prison in Spain after a Spanish court said that he could be extradited to the United States on tax evasion charges.
Taking a very quick break now. Coming up, China continues to stifle Hong Kong's autonomy. Unprecedented crackdown on media. Pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily shuts down. Welcome back. In our Look Ahead segment, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar will be attending the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in Rome. At the last G20 Foreign Ministers meet, he had proposed developing global standards on the movement of people. It had three main elements: standards on testing procedures and universal acceptability of test results, quarantine procedures as well. This is the first in-person multilateral meeting of the foreign ministers of 20 countries amidst the pandemic. Let's move on now. One of Hong Kong's most vocal pro-democracy newspapers, Apple Daily, printed its last edition on Thursday. This after its tycoon owner and other staff were arrested under a new national security law this year, and its assets were frozen as well. The paper brought to the readers pro-democracy views along with celebrity gossip and investigations regarding those in power, and many believe that its closure marks the end of an era for media freedom in an increasingly China-dominated Hong Kong. The last front page carried a photograph of a staff member waving at the supporters with the headline, "Hong Kongers bid a painful farewell in the rain." CNN's Ivan Watson is now joining us for more from Hong Kong. Ivan, how are people in Hong Kong, first of all, reacting to the closure of Apple Daily? How popular was this tabloid?
It was one of Hong Kong's most popular newspapers. The day after hundreds of police raided its offices on June 17th, it sold out 500,000 copies on the newsstands, which was a much larger circulation than it normally did. That kind of shows how people tried to show their support to the newspaper. And in fact, on the night of its last edition, as it was being printed, there was an impromptu gathering of several hundred demonstrators outside the offices of Apple Daily that eventually prompted the arrival of police, who started to disperse that crowd because basically protests and marches that had been tolerated for decades here. Over the course of the last year or so, the authorities ban all marches on the grounds, they say, of public health due to the coronavirus pandemic. Maha?
Ivan, UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has called it a chilling blow to the freedom of expression in Hong Kong. Have there been any responses from Hong Kong or Chinese officials to the reactions coming in from the world over?
Sure. The Hong Kong government insists that it is not using its national security law and these prosecutions to stifle freedom of the press here. They insist that there was a criminal conspiracy within this newspaper, and that's the same argument that they've used when they've arrested opposition politicians, for example. Accuse them of real crimes and say, no, we're not targeting critics of the government and of the Chinese central government. We're accusing these people of other terrible crimes. But you have to take a look at the bigger picture here. The elections that were supposed to take place here have been postponed indefinitely, again using that pretext, the coronavirus pandemic. The freedom of assembly, that's been virtually extinguished over the last year and a half. You have these opposition leaders who've been rounded up, and now the largest newspaper that criticized the government has been killed basically in a week's time. So if you add all of that up, it looks an awful lot like a crackdown on any organized form of criticism of the Hong Kong authorities and by extension the Chinese central government here. And you can certainly feel the chill in the air. Academics who used to talk and speak openly are much more afraid to speak. Ordinary people are much more nervous about coming out and criticizing the authorities. This is a pattern that I've seen in other countries where there have been crackdown on opposition. In Turkey, for example, in decades past. In Russia. So as much as the Hong Kong government denies what this pattern is, you have to judge based on what you can see right in front of you, and that is that Hong Kong is a much less free place than it was even 18 months ago.
That's unfortunate. Ivan Watson-May, thanks for joining us with all those details. Now, Derek Chauvin, the former American police officer who killed George Floyd last year, has been sentenced to 22.5 years in prison. The killing that sparked the Black Lives Matter movement in the U.S. has seen this landmark judgment with the handing down of the longest sentence to a police officer ever in the state of Minnesota.
The court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months.
Former police officer Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22.5 years in the murder of George Floyd. Chauvin was convicted in April of second-degree unintentional murder and taken back into custody today. The sentence includes a 10-year addition to the state sentencing guidelines, but less time than the 30 years requested by prosecutors.
This is the longest sentence that a police officer has ever been sentenced to in the history of the state of Minnesota. But this should not be the exception when a black person is killed by brutality by police. It should be the norm.
Before the sentence came down, Derek Chauvin publicly spoke to the Floyd family for the first time.
I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you.
Earlier, emotional victim impact statements, starting with Floyd's 7-year-old daughter.
Do you wish that he was still here with us?
Yeah, but he is.
Through his spirit?
Yes.
If you could say anything to your daddy right now, what would it be?
It would be, I miss you and I love you.
Floyd's brothers and nephew repeatedly demanded the maximum sentence for Chauvin, describing the harrowing impact of his murder on their lives.
Our family is forever broken, and one thing we cannot get back is George Floyd.
And George Floyd's brother, Terrence, addressed Chauvin directly.
What were you thinking? What was going through your head? when you had your knee on my brother's neck.
In Chauvin's corner, after a motion to reconsider the case was dismissed earlier this morning, Chauvin's mother spoke out for the first time publicly about her son, describing him as a good, thoughtful, and honorable man.
The public will never know the loving and caring man he is that his family does.
Outside of the courthouse at Cup Foods, where George Floyd was murdered, a mixed reaction to the sentence, but a feeling by some that justice was done.
Certainly a landmark judgment there. That's it then for today. See you again next week. Bye-bye.